She thought he was just her overprotective brother. But what if he wasn't her brother at all? Evelyn Monroe, a rising music star, uncovers a haunting secret about the man who raised her, Julian, the only person who ever truly saw her. As love and truth collide, lines blur between devotion and desire. This isn't just a story. It's a slow-burn revelation that will leave you breathless. Where are you watching from? Drop your city in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories that push boundaries and break hearts wide open. The late summer breeze rolled gently through the back garden of the Monroe estate, carrying the distant hum of the city and the faint scent of jasmine. Evelyn Monroe sat barefoot on the cool stone ledge, her toes brushing the dewy grass, a forgotten lyric notebook resting on her lap. Her long curls danced with the wind, and in her hand she twirled a white daisy. Ironic, given how much she hated the name people used to call her in school. Miss Perfect? She was anything but. The house behind her loomed in elegant silence, a mansion of glass and steel nestled in the heart of Chicago's wealthiest neighborhood. From the outside, it was everything a girl could dream of: grandeur, luxury, success. But to Evelyn, it had always felt more like a gilded cage, especially with Julian Monroe in it. Julian, her older brother, her guardian. The man who had stepped in when her world fell apart at age 7 after the car crash that stole her parents and everything she knew. The man who dried her tears, paid for her voice lessons, and taught her how to drive. The man who, in recent years, had become something else. She couldn't explain it, but something had shifted between them. It was in the way his eyes lingered when she dressed up for her shows, or how his jaw clenched when another man looked her way. He always brushed it off with that cold, composed smile of his, masking everything behind the perfect facade of an overprotective older brother. But Evelyn wasn't a little girl anymore, and she knew obsession when she saw it. The thought made her shiver. She hugged her knees tighter, staring into the darkening sky, trying to push away the memory of last night. Her performance at the Lincoln Lounge had been electric. She'd never felt more alive, more in control, until Julian showed up. He wasn't supposed to be there. Not uninvited, not lurking in the shadows, watching her every move like a predator sizing up prey. And then there was Miles, confident, charming, a director who had seen something in her music no one else had. He'd complimented her after the show, offered to buy her a drink. It had felt normal, refreshing, until Julian appeared behind her like a storm cloud, his hand tightening on her wrist with a quiet threat in his voice. "We're leaving, now." Evelyn had never been more humiliated. He hadn't spoken on the way home, neither had she. But the silence was louder than any argument. She knew he'd do it again. Chase away anyone who got too close. Her friends, collaborators, even fellow artists, Julian always found a way to make them disappear from her orbit. She stared at her phone now, the screen lighting up with a text from him. "Come inside. It's getting cold." Of course he knew she was out here. He always knew. Watching, waiting. Evelyn let the daisy fall from her fingers and exhaled slowly. At 21, she was done pretending. She had built a name for herself. Her debut single had gone viral. Her voice was being called the velvet flame of R&B, and fashion houses were lining up to dress her. But no matter how far she flew, Julian's shadow stretched just as far. She stood up, brushing off her skirt, and walked toward the glass doors. Through the reflection, she caught a glimpse of herself. Strong, poised, famous. But inside, she was still that girl searching for truth. And the truth? It was getting harder to ignore. Julian didn't act like a brother. He didn't look at her like a brother. And if he wasn't her brother, really, then what the hell were they? The morning sun filtered through the tall windows of the Monroe mansion, casting golden lines across the marble floor. Evelyn sat at the breakfast counter, absently stirring a spoon through her untouched coffee. Across from her, Julian stood by the glass wall, reading something on his phone, perfectly dressed in his charcoal suit. As always, he was unreadable, polished, composed, like nothing had happened. But Evelyn was still burning inside. The memory of the night before replayed in her head like a scene she couldn't escape. The way Julian had yanked her from the club, the way Miles had looked at her, confused, concerned, as she was dragged away without explanation. She'd wanted to scream then, to pull away, to slap Julian and tell him he had no right. But instead, she had gone quiet, let him drive her home, sat in silence as the city passed by in a blur. Her voice had left her. Now, she couldn't hold it in any longer. Why did you do that? Her voice was low, but it cut through the air like glass. Julian didn't look up from his phone. He wasn't good for you. You don't even know him. I know enough. Enough to humiliate me? She stood, her hands gripping the edge of the counter. You treated me like a child, Julian. You embarrassed me in front of everyone. He was just talking to me. Julian finally looked up, his eyes steady. He wasn't just talking, and you know it. Evelyn's breath caught. There was something in his tone, something sharp, possessive, dangerous. I'm not yours to manage, she said, quieter now. I'm not your responsibility anymore. You live in my house. I can change that. The silence that followed was so heavy it pressed against her chest. Julian set down his phone slowly and crossed the room toward her. His presence was overwhelming, tall, calculated, intense. He stopped a few feet away, his jaw tight. I've protected you your entire life, Evelyn. You think that's something I can just stop doing because you're legally an adult? I don't want your protection, she snapped. Not if it means suffocating me. Julian looked at her for a long moment, then turned and walked away, disappearing down the hallway without a word. Evelyn stood there, her hands shaking. Her heart was pounding too loudly in her ears. Later that afternoon, she found a large white box on her piano bench. Wrapped with a sleek black ribbon, she didn't have to check the tag to know it was from him. She unwrapped it hesitantly. Inside was a new keyboard, a high-end limited edition digital piano she had casually mentioned once in passing weeks ago. Sitting on top was a small envelope. She opened it. Just one sentence, handwritten in his sharp, clean strokes. I'm sorry if I overstepped. Evelyn swallowed hard, her throat tight. No explanation, no signature, no flowers. Just the piano and the note. She ran her fingers across the keys, then quickly pulled back. It felt like a bribe, but also something deeper, an apology in the only language Julian seemed capable of speaking, control disguised as care. She walked out of the room and climbed the attic stairs, heart racing. She hadn't been up here in years. Dust floated in golden shafts of light. Old furniture, stacked boxes, holiday decorations, everything the house didn't want to display. She dug through a pile of storage bins until she found it. A photo album she didn't recognize. Inside were pictures of her, young, wide-eyed, holding stuffed animals, sitting in the lap of a woman who wasn't her foster mother. One photo in particular made her pause. A man she'd never seen before, standing next to that same woman, both holding a baby. The name Evelyn was scribbled on the back in faded ink, and no Julian in sight. She closed the album slowly, her breath trembling. Her stomach knotted as realization crept over her like a slow, cold wave. There were pieces of her story that didn't fit, pieces that no one had ever told her. And maybe it was time she started asking why. The soft rain pattered against the kitchen windows, a rhythmic hush that filled the silence between Evelyn and Margaret Monroe. The older woman sat at the end of the long wooden table, her silk robe pristine despite the early hour, a steaming cup of chamomile tea between her hands. Evelyn stood across from her, arms crossed tightly, heart pounding in her chest. I need to ask you something, Evelyn said, her voice brittle. Margaret looked up, her expression calm but wary. Of course, sweetheart. Evelyn hesitated, then said it. Is Julian really my brother? The question hung in the air like a live wire, buzzing with everything unsaid. Margaret didn't respond right away. She set down her cup with a soft clink, folded her hands neatly, and met Evelyn's gaze with an unsettling stillness. Why would you ask that? She said, not unkindly, but carefully. Evelyn pulled the faded photograph from her pocket and slid it across the table. Margaret didn't touch it. She only looked. Because this isn't you, Evelyn said, voice cracking. And that's not Julian. Margaret let out a breath, one that seemed to deflate years of pretense. No, she said finally. It's not. Evelyn's hands clenched at her sides. So, it's true, we're not related. Margaret nodded slowly. You were 4 when you came to us. Your parents had no living relatives. You'd survived the accident with nothing but a fractured arm and a memory too young to hold on to. We adopted you quietly. We never thought this would be complicated. Did Julian know? Evelyn whispered. Margaret's lips pressed into a line. Yes, he was there when we brought you home. He was old enough to understand. Evelyn took a shaky step back. The floor beneath her felt less solid than before. "All these years," she murmured, "and no one ever said a word. We thought we were protecting you, giving you stability, a family. But I never asked for lies," Evelyn snapped, her voice rising. "You let me believe he was my brother. You let me call him that. You let him—" Her voice faltered. The memory of Julian's eyes, the way they burned when he looked at her, the way his touch lingered too long, all of it surged to the surface, raw and undeniable now. Margaret stood slowly. "Evelyn," she said gently, "whatever you're feeling, whatever this has stirred, it's not your fault." Evelyn couldn't speak. Her chest ached, her mind was spinning. Without another word, she turned and left the kitchen, her feet moving before her thoughts could catch up. Rain kissed her skin as she stepped outside, but she didn't care. She walked and walked until the Monroe mansion was nothing but a shadow behind her. By evening, she was gone. The apartment was small and unfurnished, but it was hers. Evelyn stood in the middle of the empty space, her phone off, her suitcase half unpacked, the only sound the distant hum of traffic. Her fingers trembled as she reached into her bag and pulled out the keyboard Julian had given her, the one she swore she wouldn't take. She set it on the floor and plugged it in anyway. She sat cross-legged before it, pressed a key, and let the low note ring out like a beginning. Over the next few weeks, she disappeared from the Monroe radar. No calls, no texts. She blocked Julian's number. The press speculated. Some fans noticed she'd moved out. But Evelyn stayed quiet, pouring her confusion into music, writing songs she never planned to release. She was trying to figure out who she was without him. But every night, when she lay on the too-firm mattress, the same questions haunted her. What was this bond they had built? Why had it never felt like brother and sister? And if it wasn't that, then what had it always been? She didn't have the answers. Not yet. But she knew one thing. She couldn't go back until she did. The club was packed, the energy electric as Evelyn stepped onto the stage. The spotlight bathed her in gold, casting long shadows on the velvet curtains behind her. Her heart thudded in time with the low beat of the bass as she took a slow breath and brought the microphone to her lips. It was her first live performance since leaving the Monroe mansion, and every note she sang was threaded with fire, sorrow, and truth. She sang like she had something to prove. Because she did. That she could exist without Julian. That she could breathe without him. That her voice belonged to her alone. When the final note hung in the air and the crowd erupted into applause, Evelyn smiled, bowed slightly, and stepped off the stage with her chest heaving, as if the weight she'd been carrying had just cracked open a little. Backstage, she grabbed a bottle of water and leaned against the wall, catching her breath. Compliments swirled around her. Strangers, staff, the owner of the venue. But one voice stopped her cold. "Still breathtaking," he said, low and familiar. She turned sharply. Julian stood near the entrance, dressed in black as always, his presence unmistakable even in a room full of noise. His eyes met hers, unreadable but intense, and she felt the room tilt. "You shouldn't be here," she said, her throat suddenly dry. "I know," he replied quietly, "but I needed to see you." She didn't answer, couldn't. He stepped closer, slower than usual, like he wasn't sure if he was allowed. "You were incredible up there." She looked away. "Don't do that. Don't come here and act like things are normal." "I'm not," he said. "Nothing's normal. Not anymore." A tense silence fell between them. Then Julian reached into his coat and handed her something. A worn notebook, its edges frayed, the pages slightly bent. "What's this?" she asked. "My journal," he said. "From when you came to live with us." Evelyn stared at him, stunned. "You kept a journal?" "I didn't mean to. It started as notes, then turned into something else." She opened it with hesitant fingers. The first page was dated the week she arrived, her name written in shaky handwriting. As she flipped through, her eyes caught fragments of sentences. She had a nightmare. "I held her hand until she fell asleep again. She smiled at me today, and I thought my chest might split open. She's growing up too fast, and I don't know how to make sense of what I feel. I know it's wrong, but it doesn't feel wrong, not when it's her." Her breath caught. Her hands trembled as she snapped the journal shut. You wrote all this?" she whispered. Julian nodded, his gaze heavy. "I've been lying to myself for years, Evelyn, pretending I was doing everything to protect you, but it was never just that." She couldn't look at him. "You shouldn't have come. I had to, he said, because the longer we don't talk about this, the worse it gets. I'm not your brother. I never was. And you need to know, I've loved you since before I even understood what it meant. She shook her head, tears brimming. Don't say that. I have to, he said, his voice cracking now, because you deserve the truth. I love you, Evelyn, not as a sister, not as family, as a man who spent every day wanting to be more. A beat passed, 2. Evelyn's pulse roared in her ears. Part of her wanted to run. Another part, an older, deeper part, just stood there, frozen. I don't know how to feel, she admitted finally. You turned my whole world upside down. I know, he said, eyes soft, but maybe it was never right side up to begin with. She didn't respond. She couldn't. So she turned and walked away. But she didn't throw away the journal. She held on to it like a question she wasn't ready to answer. Not yet. Rain had begun to fall by the time Evelyn stepped out of the rideshare, the night air cool against her skin. She stood in front of the Monroe mansion, heart pounding in her chest like it was trying to climb out. The garden lights shimmered through the drizzle, casting the house in a soft, almost sacred glow. For a long moment she didn't move. She just stared up at the home that had raised her, broken her, and, somewhere along the line, become the place she no longer feared returning to. She didn't knock. She didn't text. She just pushed the door open and stepped inside. The house was quiet. No staff, no footsteps echoing in the grand hall. Just the gentle hum of the rain outside and the weight of everything she had left behind. Her heels clicked softly on the marble floor as she walked upstairs, each step heavier than the last. She paused outside Julian's room, her hand hovering over the doorknob. Her reflection stared back at her in the glossy wood, strong but trembling. She took a breath and turned the handle. Julian was sitting on the edge of the bed, head bowed, his elbows on his knees, hands clasped like he was trying to pray the storm away. He didn't move when the door creaked open, didn't even lift his head. But then he felt it, her presence, like gravity shifting in the room. He looked up slowly, his eyes wide with disbelief. Evelyn. She stepped in, closing the door behind her. Her voice was quiet but clear. You said something to me the night of the club. Julian stood, cautious, like the moment might shatter if he breathed too hard. You said you can't breathe when I'm mad at you, that I'm in everything you do, that you'd burn the world to keep me. She swallowed. I heard you. His throat worked. He wanted to speak but couldn't trust his voice. She stepped closer, now only inches between them. And I need you to hear me now. Julian's chest rose and fell, his entire body tense with hope and fear. I've tried to forget it, she said. Tried to tell myself it was just confusion, that I was angry, that you'd crossed a line I could never forgive. She looked up at him, eyes glistening. But the truth is, I've always felt it too. I just didn't know what it was. He blinked, stunned. I've never looked at you like a brother, she continued, her voice cracking. Not since I was 16. Not since I realized that the safest place in the world wasn't just in this house. It was in you. Julian reached out, hesitating for a second, then touched her face so gently it almost undid her. You don't have to say anything, she whispered, leaning into his palm. I just needed to come back. Because this, whatever this is, it doesn't feel wrong. Not to me. Not anymore. He didn't wait. He pulled her into him like she was oxygen, and he'd been drowning without her. Their lips met softly at first, but quickly deepened. Years of tension, denial, longing melting into a kiss that neither of them would ever forget. There was no fear now, no guilt, no more pretending. They moved together like they'd been waiting a lifetime, their hands learning, unlearning, remembering. Each touch was reverent, like discovering something holy. When he whispered her name against her skin, she shivered, not from the cold, but from finally feeling seen, chosen, home. Later, wrapped in each other beneath the quiet hum of the rain, Evelyn traced the curve of his jaw and said softly, You were never my brother, Julian. He looked down at her, eyes full of awe. And I was always yours. Love doesn't always arrive in the form we expect. Sometimes it hides in familiar places, tangled in years of silence, blurred boundaries, and unspoken truth. The truth between us isn't just a story about two people finding each other. It's a story about listening to your heart, even when the world tells you not to. Evelyn and Julian taught us that family isn't always defined by blood, and love, when it's genuine, doesn't follow a rulebook, it writes its own. This story reminds us that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is to face the truth about who you are, what you feel, and who you love. Even if it's uncomfortable, even if it breaks every expectation. In a world full of noise, expectations, and judgment, choosing your own truth is a radical act of self-love. They didn't fall in love overnight. It wasn't easy, but it was real. And in the end, that's what matters most. Not how love begins, but how fiercely we choose it when it finally stands in front of us. So wherever you are in the world, whatever love means to you, I hope this story moved you, challenged you, maybe even healed a piece of you. Let me know where you're watching from in the comments. Your city, your country, your heart. And if this story touched you, don't forget to hit that subscribe button to stay with us for more real, powerful, unforgettable stories. Because love, raw, complicated, and honest, deserves to be told, and you're exactly where you need to be to hear it.